welcome Jill Stein to the podium. And she was the 2012 Green Party presidential candidate. So I'm just hooking up the power because we've got the power. And big thank you to the St. Petersburg Greens above all for making this happen. And the Jennifer Sullivan for making everything happen. And a big thank you to the St. Petersburg Museum of History because, and thank you for that wonderful spoken word, which was just like, wow, amazing. I would love to hear that again about 10 times.
Actually, I've got a CD, but unfortunately I don't have it on me right now.
Okay, next time. Yeah, bring it out. That's really dynamite. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And, it's great to be here in the Museum of History because this is an incredibly historic moment where there's a lot of stuff going on. And there is an incredible uprising for democracy and justice, which is really happening all over the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and about the power that we really do have to take back the promise of democracy and what our lives ought to be like and everything else. So I'm going to talk about how we are rising up green, rising up just, rising up for democracy. And a Green New Deal is sort of a focus for how we can fix this. This is a win-win. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is kind of a good news package. And I want to put it out there for people to use. Somebody asked me a question the other day about, so what do you do when people are just so hopeless and feel so overwhelmed? How do you deal with them? And my response is to say, well, it's kind of like we all have to be political therapists. And when people don't rise up, it's because they either don't know how serious the problem is, or they don't know how right at hand the solutions are. It's not like we can't afford it, we can't afford not to do it. So all rolled into one here, this is kind of a package of how serious the threats are, but how absolutely in our hands right now the fix is. And what it really comes down to is just flicking the switch in our own brains from powerlessness, which is what the powers that be want us to think, that we are powerless, to actually realizing that in fact we are powerful. We have solutions and we have the numbers. In the court of public opinion, we've actually already won. So this is sort of that news rolled into one. So starting off, this is about that democracy movement that's rising up, that's Tahrir Square, the Occupy Wall Street, all over the country, really all over the world, the tar sands blockade, the teachers' strikes, this was in Chicago, but they're going on all over, as our public schools are being shut down, the Walmart workers' walkouts, and other workers who are standing up for workers' rights and for decent wages in the fast food industry as well, and for the right to unionize. The student debt movement, which is really the powerhouse all over the world. Students standing up for jobs and for affordable education and to get out of debt is another huge driver. The movement to stop evictions and to blockade evictions is happening all over. And the demonstrations to stop nuclear power and fracking and GMOs. And let me just ask, people who are here tonight, how many are here because you heard about this through the Green Party and you're part of the Green Party? Some and not everyone, okay. And others are here, I'm just curious, what networks you heard about this through? Facebook. Okay, cool. And was that through, through the GMO network or? Okay. All right, great. Well, that's really good because I think this is about the Green Party, but it's also much bigger than the Green Party. And I think that politics is one tool here, but it's also about a social movement, which is much bigger. And how we bring the power of all this uprising together. So, when you step back and you look at what's going on, we've got a set of these converging crises, and you say, like, oh my God, where do I start first? From the Wall Street bailouts to the unemployment and declining wages, the corporate free trade agreements with this new Trans-Pacific Partnership. Have people heard about that? Oh yeah. All right, so some have heard, some not heard about it yet, because it's not out there in the media much. All right, so most people know about it, great. The attacks on Medicare and Social Security, foreclosures and debt, the expanding war. Obama gave this speech the other night about how he was going to rein in, this war, but really what he was doing was just sort of redefining it in a very slippery way. If you actually looked carefully at what he said, he said things like that the drone attacks would no longer be limited to high-level operational leadership in Al-Qaeda and associated forces. He took those words out, which really describes what's happening there, because it's only 2% of some 4,000 people plus who've been killed by these drones, only 2% that are high-level operatives. Who else is being killed here? It just speaks volumes about this war on terror. And, he didn't say anything about our needing to have Congress restored to its power to declare war. War should not be established by fiat from a declaration in 2001 that said that the president, and it didn't say this, but the president is using that to say he can declare war anytime, anywhere, every place, and can kill anyone, including US citizens. That is the power of a dictator, not the power of a president. So, and then it's one area where Greens and Libertarians come absolutely together. We're both really united in fighting the power of tyranny. And I'll come back to this in a minute, and to the things that Jennifer was saying before about this war on our basic liberties, our basic freedoms, on civil liberties, and this expanded power of the presidency, which basically defies all the checks and balances that were established by our, by our founding mothers and fathers, the fathers explicitly, but with the guidance of the mothers, I must say. They established all of these safeguards, these checks and balances, these limits on power. And we see a presidency that has just gone wild, both in terms of its expanded war, but also in terms of its attacks on our civil liberties. And whether it's the First Amendment and our right to a free press, our right to protest, our right for redress of grievances, it's all under attack, as well as our rights to privacy and our right to freedom from unwarranted searches. But any one of these things would be very disturbing. The fact that they are all happening together is really a wake-up call that we need to stand up. And these violations of democracy and our civil liberties are just part of this larger constellation of what's going wrong. And you can add to that the assault on immigrant rights, and even this new sort of immigration reform bill, if you actually look at it, it is a real slap in the face to basic human rights and the principles, really, of respect for human rights and international law. So that's a state of emergency. Food security. How many were at the GMO thing today? Okay, awesome. That was so exciting. I want to give a big shout out for that. That was, as I understand, one of the biggest demonstrations that had happened in Tampa in years. And that was organized in just a couple of weeks. And that was just one out of about 200 rallies or so that were taking place all over the country. So that, again, is a real sign, of the wake-up call and the uprising for democracy and justice that's going on. And we'll come to that in just a second. The climate movement, too, and the threats to the climate. So you put them all together, and it's like, oh my God, which way to turn? And where do I start? Anybody ever have that feeling? Like, there's so much going on, you don't know where to begin. And I will say, as someone who didn't get political until I turned 50, I was working my way through the list of issues that we got to worry about. And as a healthcare provider, I was first working on health and our right to a healthcare system. And, thinking if anything was going to sort of get people up in arms, that would speak to everybody. But in Massachusetts, we actually held a referendum. We were outspent 30-1, only beat back by 2 points. This was a referendum for a single-payer system like Medicare for All. Outspent 30-1, we were beat back by 2 points. But, this is what they do. They pile on where they see, the pushback coming. So I sort of worked my way from healthcare then to environmental organizing. And we got, pushed back. At first we were shutting down incinerators and coal plants, and instead starting programs and helping to support programs for clean renewable energy, create jobs that, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry. How's that? Okay, terrific. Instead, creating jobs in clean renewable energy, healthy food systems, recycling. We don't need the incinerators, and we don't need the landfills either. We could be recycling and redesigning actually our products for life cycle design. Every one of these problems can be solved in a way that creates lots of jobs, and jobs that don't make us sick or commit us to a permanent state of war, but actually make us healthy and make the economy healthy. So a bunch of us got together and said, hey, let's pass campaign finance reform, because it's the power of these predators to buy off our elected officials that stops us dead in our tracks all the time. Every time we're about to actually fix one of these problems, we get thwarted by the power of money and politics. We passed campaign finance reform in my home state. We passed public financing for campaigns by a 2-1 margin in a public referendum. And then what happened was the Democratic legislature, 95% Democratic in Massachusetts at the time, turned around and they repealed it on a voice vote. Wow. And that said to me, this isn't something we can fix within the system. We have to change the whole system, throw the bums out, start over with clean politics. So at the young, tender age of 50, I got political. And for the first time, I became a member of a political party, realizing that their goal is to keep us divided and conquered. There's nothing they want more than to have us divided into all these different silos, each working separately, each of us never getting to critical mass on what we need to fix. That's exactly the way they want it, or for us to feel too defeated and overpowered to do anything about it. So, and one day the light bulb went off for me, and I realized that if we were going to win on any one of these issues, we needed to start building broad coalitions across the spectrum of people, peace, and the planet, and democracy. It all comes together. And then the other light bulb went off saying, oh, that's what a political party is. Because when you start building coalitions, it takes work. And it really takes a certain dedicated structure to do that. So I finally realized that's what a political party should be. It should not be what it is in this country with the two corporate parties basically sold to the highest bidder and to the fossil fuels and the predatory lenders and the big banks. That's what political parties are about in this country. So, at any rate, at that point, I got recruited to run for office, and have never stopped running for office for the last 12 years. It is a way to organize. It is not the be-all, end-all by any means. The real driver here in change is social movement. But a political voice is one very important tool for fighting that fight. And as you saw, as Bruce was saying earlier, and big shout out to Bruce for running for sheriff. And for starting a green shadow cabinet at the local level. I think that is so cool, a green shadow government at the local level. It's awesome. And we're now doing this at the national level. We realized when the campaign was over that people didn't want to stop. Just because they won a rigged election doesn't mean that we're supposed to stop fighting, sit down and surrender, and roll over. So I'm going to just figure out how to shut this off. I think that did it. All right, good. And that feedback. So we decided, or I should say we realized, that we could keep this going in all kinds of ways by continuing this sort of road trip to reach out and help empower and activate people at the grassroots level. And that we could continue this by having a cabinet and actually fighting. Yeah, do you know what that feedback is? I'm too close to it. I don't think it's that one, but maybe I'm talking too close. Yeah. Maybe I don't need the mic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so it's not the mic. Okay, great. we weren't hearing an echo in your brain. Okay. So anyway, we realized that we could create a cabinet that would be watchdogging. And in fact, shadow cabinets are it's like an institution that's used in many democracies around the world. They create a shadow cabinet after an election in order to continue the opposition voice. In this country, there is no opposition party. Democrats and Republicans basically agree on 90% of their agenda, except, on the sort of the margins of social policy. And they make a very big deal out of that. But, the differences on women's reproductive rights, which is important, on voting rights, which is important. But that's not going to save your job. It's not going to save the climate. It's not going to stop the ripoff from the banks. It's not going to stop this predatory Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's not going to stop the foreclosures, which continue to throw millions of families out of their homes. We need a green sheriff to do that. So, we realized we could keep this going. And it's great because their fear machine really revs up during an election. It's constantly scaring people and trying to convince you that you've got to vote for the lesser evil when the differences between them are really window dressing. But they're very focused on fear campaigning during an election. After an election, the fear machine kind of, it's not happening. So you actually get to have a real conversation about what our lives look like and about the power that we actually have to stand up and fight back and take back our future. So it's been incredibly exciting. Go to greenshadowcabinet.us when you're really outraged at what is coming down from Democrats and Republicans, like this expanding war and the free trade agreements and the endless foreclosures, the jobs recovery, which is not a recovery. These are low-wage and insecure jobs. We have more people than ever on food stamps, even while the economy is supposed to have been recovering. There are almost 50 million Americans now who need food assistance in order to get through the day. So that recovery ain't happening. The Department of Labor actually predicts that 9 out of 10 jobs being created over the next 10 years are low-wage, insecure jobs that do not require a college degree. They don't pay college wages. So this is the kind of economy that they have engineered us into, and that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as another one of these free trade agreements, is just going to keep pushing us towards. So corporate America and the two parties that represent it are very happy with the economy. Corporate profits have never been better. Wall Street and the stock market has never been higher. They like this just fine. So they have stayed the course. It's up to us to change the course and take our future back. So I'm going to focus in here a little bit on two of these crises because they're kind of central, and share with you how they are unbelievably fixable in a way that is just a win-win across the board. So we're going to focus in on the unemployment crisis and declining wages, and also on the climate crisis. And we'll talk a little bit about food security and the democracy crisis too. So this is just some of the little factoids I mentioned before. I mentioned some of these, about the economic crisis. Actually, I guess I didn't mention these. One out of every two people, according to the most recent census, the U.S. Census Bureau, 1 out of every 2 Americans are in poverty or low income and heading for poverty. That is not okay. 36 million students are in debt. That students are recent graduates. Half of all college graduates are working in jobs that do not pay college wages, which means you can't repay those loans. So these are indentured servants. This is where the real power for change comes from. It's what the driver was in Tahrir Square and in all the democracy revolutions in the Middle East. It's an ongoing battle, but it is well underway, and it's being driven largely by young people who recognize they don't have a future in the system as it exists. The jobs I mentioned before, 1 out of every 3 African-American young men is either in jail, on probation, or on parole. This is absolutely unacceptable. We need to stop that school-to-prison pipeline and actually create jobs in our community, which is going to fix this. And here's a little picture to just take home with you because it makes so crystal clear. I thought I was, fairly well informed, but it wasn't until a few years ago that I actually understood what the American economy looks like. Imagine you have 100 people in a room, and that represents the American population. And you have 100 loaves of bread, and that represents all our wealth and resources. The richest person in the room gets 50 loaves of bread, and the 50 poorest people in the room are sharing 1 loaf of bread. We hear a lot about how obscenely rich the 1% is, but we don't hear very much about how obscenely, immorally poor we have made half of the American population sharing 1 loaf of bread. So this is a revolution waiting to happen. And what are they doing about it? More free trade agreements, these tiered wage programs. This is what Obama was so busy celebrating, and this is why they went, to the mat to prevent Sherry Honkala and myself from participating in the debates, because they didn't want word getting out that these jobs are not a recovery. These are jobs being created, coming in at half the wages of what these manufacturing jobs used to pay before. So they do not have any semblance of a recovery going on. This is why we're creating jobs, but we have more people on food assistance than ever. They are cutting Medicare and Social Security. They are continuing the Wall Street bailouts, another little known fact. How many people were aware of that? That we continue to bail out Wall Street? A few, but it's not many. They don't talk about it. $85 billion a month. Wall Street banks are continuing to be bailed out. Wow. If we, instead of buying up bad debt, the banks, instead we were buying up the debt of student loans, we would have the student loan debt, it would be over. It would have been over in a year, and they've been doing this now. They're well into their second year. So student debt would be gone. That's what democracy looks like. All this nonsense about fiscal cliff sequestration, the White House budget, this is like all the wrong stuff, and they're not fixing it. And then quickly, I'm going to come to how we're going to fix that in a moment, and it's not rocket science. I want to share some of the little key factoids about the climate crisis, because it's important in our conversations with each other. We need to be political therapists. And part of being political therapists is helping people get a grip on what's actually happening, because this information gets suppressed all over the place. But we don't have very long to fix this, and it will really get you up and out of your seat to recognize how really imminent these threats are. So, these are numbers actually from a recent report to the United Nations. Already it's almost 500,000 people a year who are being killed through climate, largely through flooding and drought. And these are largely poor people around the world. But it is coming home to roost here in the US as well. Not so many deaths, but huge economic impacts. And part of that was the storms and the extreme weather events of recent years. In 2011, we broke all records in terms of severe weather events. We had 14 storms and other events, droughts, that cost us as taxpayers at least $1 billion. So that was $14 billion events. And the next year we had almost as many. So we're off the charts. Just a few weeks ago, we heard about the fires outside of LA, the forest fires. Absolutely record-setting fires. There were at least 1,000, and may have been more homes that had to be evacuated. These came really close to highly populated areas around Los Angeles. And what was so scary about this was that this is the kind of firestorm you would normally see after a very long, hot, dry summer. Now we are seeing this kind of a storm early in the spring. So that is a heads up. The drought, we now have permanent drought. There's a term for it called mega drought. I don't know, are you familiar with that? It's a term scientists are using to describe what's going on now in the South and in the Southwest. So this is impacting our food supply as well as our water supplies, raising the price of food for everybody throughout the U.S. And another thing that comes with this, aside from the floods and the storms, are heat waves. And we haven't heard too much about this, but a few years ago, you may remember in Europe, this was I think in 2003, there was a period of a week where they had sustained temperatures of 105. And does this ring bells for people? France and Italy and maybe Spain too. There's about 40 or 50,000 people who died with sustained heat of 105. Now the deal is, all of these changes that we just talked about have happened with less than 1 degree centigrade warming. It's about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit if you use our system. All these changes happen with less than 1 degree centigrade. But right now the science is predicting we're going to be at 2, 3, or 4 degrees by 2050. Anybody plan to be here in 2050? Most alive on the planet. On the planet? Anybody? Quite a few of us, I think. So the term 2050 starts to really mean something. They used to say, don't worry, these kinds of serious climate changes are centuries away. Now it's happening in our lifetimes and today. 80% of all the warming has happened in the last 25 years. 80% of the changes that have been spread out over a decade and a half, a century and a half, have happened in just the last couple decades. So it is accelerating, and that means we gotta, we really need to take the bull by the horns and fix this now. And the other point here was that 105 degrees is what we would see in our old climate. But in a world that warms 2 or 3 or 4 degrees, your heat wave is not going to be 105 degrees. The heat wave is going to be more like 117 and 120 degrees. So, you know what happens then? You know, your air conditioner and your electricity and all that goes. And when it goes, and it's humid, there's really nothing you can do because the water is hot at that point. I guess here you have the ocean and you could cool down, so it would be everybody in the ocean. You know? But, what's that?
I think we'll be underwater here.
You'll be underwater. Exactly, right? And that is a very important point. Next slide, in fact, we just talked about that. Well, the other piece is that once you get to 4 degrees warming, which some very reputable agencies are now predicting by 2050. Once you get to 4 degrees warming, your agricultural productivity goes down about by half. So all kinds of things. You don't want to go there. Here's the other thing that happens. So this is what the Arctic looked like in 1979. This was 2007. So you can see a lot of white here. And it's half gone in 2007. And now people are predicting maybe in the next decade. Used to say by 2030. All right, but people are now saying quite likely within the next 10 years, it'll be gone, and that in turn accelerates everything else. Because once you have this patch of blue, if it's white, it reflects heat, but if it's blue, it absorbs heat. So once we're in the process of losing this reflector right now, which is just going to accelerate the warming. So all of this is why we need a Green New Deal right now. And I'll come to that in a second. And this is one other thing about the ice. What is the elevation here? 0, 7, 10. All right, well, Greenland alone contains 20 feet of sea level. And Greenland has accelerated, the melting of Greenland has accelerated 5-fold, that is by 500%, in the last decade. People used to say, oh, don't worry, it's not going to break up for at least 1,000 years. Now people are saying, well, we don't know. We don't have a clue how these things go. And Jim Hansen, the foremost climatologist, is saying it could happen over a couple of years, not meaning in a few years, but we could get to that tipping point where it just breaks up, where your ice cube just dissolves. And it's not like a slow melt anymore. It's like a huge flood, 20 feet over a couple of years. So it doesn't give you a lot of time to acclimate. This is why, we absolutely cannot wait to call this an emergency. And it just goes on from Greenland. Greenland is 24 feet. The South Pole, down at the bottom there, that has more ice than anything. At the top, the North Pole, that ice is already in the water. So when it melts, it really doesn't raise the water level at all. So that's not a worry with the current Arctic. But for Greenland and for the Antarctic down below, that ice is all sitting on rock. So when it melts, it's water going into the bathtub, and that bathtub is going to come out. West Antarctic is 19 feet, and the East Antarctic is 170 feet. So this is not what a livable future looks like. This is Boston, just to give you an example, and that's with 20 feet. We just lose a whole lot of our densely populated urban areas, and this is at 40 feet and so on. So this is kind of what's going on here. This is 400,000 years ago, and this is coming up in time to now. And these are kind of the ice ages here. This represents how much carbon dioxide is in the air. Typically, it has cycled over a period of 100,000 years or so is usually what these changes have taken place on, very slowly. So when it goes up here, that is the melting of the ice age. When it went down here, that was the ice age, just because ice and carbon dioxide correlated. But this is what happened starting about 100 years ago. Boom. And you can see this is like nothing that has come before. This is an absolute abomination of nature. All of a sudden, the carbon our CO2 level has gone just absolutely hog wild. So, what are they doing about it? Well, Obama says, yeah, exactly. They're doing all the wrong things: fracking, drilling, you name it. The Arctic, pipelines, Keystone, free trade, and I might add GMOs and industrial agriculture are a big part of this too, because they cause deforestation in order to, plant some more GMOs, including the ethanol, and that is a big contributor to climate change. And Obama, of course, is leading us in the wrong direction, bragging about how he's increased oil production to the highest level in 16 years, built enough pipeline to circle the globe. He loves pipelines. This is what tar sands looks like. This is the forest before. This is the area that's been basically devastated by the mining of tar sands. That's in Canada. And you probably know that tar sands is it puts out more CO2. They have to put all kinds of toxic chemicals into it in order to retrieve it and then to pump it through the pipelines. And they have to keep it hot. All those things are tailor-made for pipeline ruptures. If you are pumping the oil at high pressure and it's heated and it's full of corrosive chemicals, what are you going to get? You're going to rupture your pipeline. And that's what their track record is. Lots of ruptures. And, we saw this a couple of weeks ago in Alabama, I think it was. And, this is what we can expect. Where was it?
Arkansas.
Arkansas, thank you. And this is why our water supplies are very much at risk from this stuff. So the tar sands has to be stopped. And when tens of thousands of us, probably 50,000, went to the White House to tell the president to stand up to big oil, the president was golfing with big oil in the form of this guy, Jim Crane, who's a big investor in fossil fuels, and that's his golfing resort down here in Florida somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where, but this is where the 1% goes. And Obama got out of town. He just hightailed it out of town when 50 people came in to say you gotta stand up to the pipeline. He went to play golf with the pipeline. So some of us weren't too surprised. Was anybody there? Was anybody in DC? I know that's a long way to go from here, but it was wonderful. And this is what fracking pads look like. I guess that's one thing you don't have to worry about in Florida. You too?
Yes,
Is it going on now?
they want it to.
They're trying. Okay. All right. Great. Well, then I will say a few words about fracking. Yeah. This is just more absolute suicide. Devastates our water supplies, our roads. Uses up huge amounts of water at a time when we have water shortages to start with. And it's very toxic to the nearby communities. The gases, the toxic stuff that's used to dissolve the rock is, it comes back out. What goes in goes out, and it goes into the air supply, and these wells are put, when they come in, they go all over the community. They're put in playgrounds, in people's backyards. They're virtually everywhere, and they totally industrialize the landscape. So, finally, why we have to stop GMOs? As you probably know, this is crazy on many levels. It consolidates seeds into the hands of a few big multinational companies. And that is another abomination of nature. Nature, for the past 6 billion years that we've had life on the planet, one rule that nature always obeys is that you have to have lots of seeds. Whenever life forms of any sort, create the next generation, they need lots of seeds and they need diversity. Putting this all in the hands of 3 companies who own more than half the seed supply right now, and creating a uniform line of seeds is absolutely suicidal in the big scheme of how life works. You need it to be decentralized, you need it to be diverse, you need to have lots of different options. Because in the history of life, conditions change in unpredictable ways. And your best insurance policy against that is to have lots of seeds. When trees, you know, yes, lots of seeds in many different kinds. Think of a dandelion, you know, or the pollen in a flower, or a tree, you know, an oak tree. When they put out their seeds, they scatter them to the wind, and every different community has changes that are unique and different to them. It's absolutely suicidal to trash that diversity that has been built up by nature over the course of billions of years, actually. So we got to keep that. And, you know, putting it in the hands of a few companies is a disaster for our food economy. The price of seeds has tripled in the hands of Monsanto, tripled. And the requirement for pesticides goes up. This is extremely expensive. Why does it go up? Because they create pesticide-resistant weeds. This is just a self-perpetuating cycle. The more pesticides, the GMOs are pesticide tolerant, and their selling point is, oh, we can just throw a lot of pesticides on and get rid of the weeds, and, you know, piece of cake. It makes it really easy, but it doesn't work that way. It's actually created pesticide-resistant weeds, which then require more pesticides, which create more resistant weeds. So it's a never-ending cycle. And it's great if you are a supplier of pesticides, which, guess what? Monsanto is. This is all a marketing scheme for Roundup, which so we need to disrupt that marketing scheme. And, you know, it puts farmers out of business. It has caused over 200,000 farmers in India to commit suicide. They go into debt and they have no way out of it. So these guys are corporate criminals. They're climate criminals and they are food criminals. And they ought to be in jail, not walking the street. If we can hold tobacco companies accountable and fine them millions and millions of dollars for the health damage they have done, we can certainly hold GMO companies accountable for the pesticide, environmental, food security, and health damage that they are doing. And then finally, it corrupts our democracy. These guys have spent $250 million on campaign contributions and lobbying in the last decade. $250 million in order to buy the policies that permit them to make a killing. And literally, they are making a killing. They spent another $250 million in the last 2 years alone on advertising to convince people that GMOs are harmless. But you know what? It hasn't worked. Because 91% of people want to put a label on all GMO food so we can stop eating it and put it on business. And then just finally, about the democracy attack. You know, this is an attack on our basic freedoms. This just sort of lists that whole litany, which I won't take time to go through except to mention. This is about the attacks on whistleblowers. Attacking whistleblowers is an attack on the freedom of the press. We have a right to know what's going on in our government, especially when our government is violating international law and human rights. And Bradley Manning, bless his heart and his soul, for waking up not only America, but Iraq. That's why the troops came home, not because of Barack Obama. It was because Bradley Manning alerted the people of Iraq to what was really going on. That video that went viral about, what was it called?
Collateral murder.
What was it?
Collateral murder video.
Collateral murder, that's right, thank you. That was the video that Manning outed that showed how people were being targeted mercilessly by remote pilots through drones, actually, who were killing these people. And it really roused public opinion in Iraq so that the U.S. Contract to be able to put soldiers in Iraq and hold them harmless, they refused to renew it. They refused to renew it, and that's why Obama had to bring the troops home. So that was thanks to Bradley Manning and Julian Assange for making it public. So that's why whistleblowers are critical to freedom of the press, and that is our First Amendment right. The right to protest, we have a lot to protest about, and it's not going to get better by itself. So we're going to need to keep protesting, and that means we need to vigorously defend our First Amendment rights, our right to protest. And we shouldn't be thrown in jail or subject to these vindictive and punitive fines and bail for asserting our right to protest. We do have that right, and we're going to need it more and more going forward. Our basic freedoms, the presumption of innocence, that has been long-standing, this so-called habeas corpus, that you have to be accused of a crime and proven guilty in order to be kept in jail. You should not be punished or assassinated, without being accused of a crime and found guilty of it. So, these are some of the basic freedoms that the NDAA and also the AUMF, the authorization
military force.
for the use of military force. Thank you, 2001. And that's what Obama is, basing his right to assassinate you on. And he has that right to kill anybody, anywhere, anytime, if you are considered an imminent threat. What does imminent mean? According to international law, imminent means it's like happening right now. There is no time to think about it. There is no time to plan. It is happening right now. That's what imminent means. In Barack Obama's mind, imminent means you don't agree with us. Imminent means you're saying the wrong thing, like the U.S. citizen cleric who was assassinated. When he, if there were issues there, he should have been and could readily have been tried. He could have been tried. He should not have been assassinated. And the same is true, actually, for Osama bin Laden. He was unarmed. His facility was unarmed. He could, and according to international law, he should have been captured and tried. As was done, for example, in the Nuremberg trials, where many more people died than 1 or 2 or 3,000. The Nuremberg trials tried people where millions of people were murdered. And they were, they had the benefit of a trial under international laws. We still have those laws. Either we are a nation of laws and a world of laws, or we are not. And under Obama, we are increasingly becoming a lawless and unjust planet. And this too, we can stop. So let me just quickly run through how we are going to fix it with a Green New Deal. So basically a Green New Deal, have people heard about this? Do you know about it? A few. Okay. So a Green New Deal is like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. 3 months after the New Deal was started in the Great Depression, 4 million jobs have been created. Here we are, 5 years, and they only had like 12 million unemployed at the time because it was a smaller population. So within 3 months, they created millions of jobs. We can create millions of jobs right now too. And that's what the Green New Deal does. And basically, it creates 25 million jobs. It jumpstarts the green economy because those are green jobs. And at the same time, it puts a halt to climate change. And equally important, it makes wars for oil obsolete. So, as part of the Green New Deal, and Roosevelt had had this too, FDR also called for an economic bill of rights. That means a right to a job for everybody who is ready and willing to work. You have a job at a living wage, in fact. That we will end student debt, that free public higher education is a human right. We need to bail out the students and make public higher education free. And we need housing as a human right. We need to end those foreclosures. And start building some affordable housing, bring back public housing. There are many ways we can solve the housing problem. We need to break up the banks and establish public banks, separate the commercial from the investment. That was one of the pieces of the New Deal, and start taxing Wall Street.
Yeah.
Why should Wall Street be the only sector of the economy that doesn't pay a sales tax? Most Americans pay a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% sales tax. Wall Street, the richest sector of the economy, gets off without paying any. So, we used to have one actually up until the 1960s, and Kennedy phased it out because the economy was in such good shape while we were taxing Wall Street. So let's bring that Wall Street tax back and get the economy in good shape and stop the Wall Street speculators from gambling and losing and taking us down and out. We can fix that all.